Welcome to the Servant Leaders Mindset channel. Where we help leaders to grow in wisdom, purpose, self-awareness, and service. Up next.
If you lead like a robot, the robot's going to take your job. You know, all these middle managers that are worried about AI taking their job. If you are a teacher and you teach like a robot, AI is going to take your job. If you are a doctor and your bedside manner is like a robot, the robot's going to take your job. So I think that the human element is going to become more and more critical. And authenticity is going to become more and more critical. I think people are going to be thirsty for that human experience, and the human experience is going to be the competitive advantage in the long run.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Lena Holmes, and this is the Servant Leaders Mindset podcast. Today, I have a special treat for you. I will be in conversation with HR professional and PhD, Dr. David Shar. David is an international speaker and consultant who helps organizations and HR professionals reignite passion and prevent burnout at work. A popular professor at the University of Maryland, he teaches graduate courses in talent development and organizational change. David's research explores why people fall out of love with work and how to rekindle that spark before it's too late. Known for blending humor, heart, and organizational psychology, David inspires audiences to build kinder and more meaningful, burnout-proof workplaces. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland, so we're neighbors. And David also lives in a state of beautiful chaos with his wife, 5 children, and their 220-pound English Mastiff called or named Groot. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lena. Really appreciate it. So happy
Oh my
to be
goodness.
here.
You do everything big. You have a big dog and a big family.
I do. That is a constant criticism I get from my own mother. She always said, "Can't you do anything simple?" And the answer is no. We've tried. That's just not our life.
That's okay. That's okay if it works for you.
Yeah.
So David, let's get started. Let's jump into it. I like the fact that you use your humble beginnings of running an ice cream shop to talk about leadership, employee motivation, and work culture. Can you tell our audience how you found personal meaning while working in an ice cream shop?
Yeah. So this was actually the beginning of my journey. I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. I was a serial entrepreneur, getting into a whole bunch of things. And then I had this opportunity to take over a franchise. It was a Cold Stone Creamery franchise. So I love ice cream.
I remember those.
Yeah, right. And they're still around, but they're not as fun as they once were. When I was in it, you know, I love ice cream, but I also love awkward moments. So the singing for tips, do you remember that? We used to sing for tips and
Yes,
I
I
had a
do.
big banana costume in the back, and I would put that on, fortify our customers and crew. But I had so much fun with it.
Well, first of all, can you sing? Can you really sing? Do you have a good voice?
Oh yeah. I can sing very badly, but I can do it. So it's funny because we started recruiting actual singers. So my singing voice became worse and worse as we went. But just in comparison. But so I got into it for all of those reasons. I was very entrepreneurial. I liked business. I liked ice cream. I liked having fun. But there was something else happening underneath the hood. This was my first brick and mortar business with employees that relied on me and my business, you know, to put food on their table. And it was really interesting because most of my employees came from, you know, the inner city in Baltimore. If you're familiar with Baltimore, East Baltimore, West Baltimore, Dundalk, all of these neighborhoods where these young individuals came from some really rough neighborhoods. And So they would come to work and find meaning there and find that they had a voice and find that they had a sense of belonging. I'd like to say that I was so ignorant. I didn't pay attention in school in the beginning. So I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to trust a 16-year-old girl from West Baltimore with a key to the ice cream shop on her 16th birthday. But luckily, she was as naive as I was, and she didn't know I wasn't supposed to trust her with the key either. So she rose to that level of trust. And it was our joint ignorance where we hadn't had these awful work experiences and learned that work is supposed to be, leadership versus frontline staff. None of us had learned those bad habits. And so we literally worked side by side to make this beautiful little ice cream shop, just this beautiful piece of Baltimore. We would, around this time of year, we would pop into customers. We'd find out customers like would send us addresses for family members and things that were in need. And we'd show up with ice cream and some of our really good singers. And we would sing Christmas carols and give them free ice cream, and we would have huge dance parties with the ARC Baltimore. They bring over 100 individuals with developmental disabilities. We'd bring almost our entire staff. They'd bring a DJ, we'd bring an ice cream bar, and we would just dance for hours. And I dance as well as I sing. but, but I didn't really understand the impact until one day this crew member came in. It was, I'm this privileged Jewish boy from Pikesville, if you know the Baltimore neighborhood. And I wasn't exposed to so much that I was exposed to working with my crew members. And I remember this bizarre Romeo and Juliet kind of story. I had two crew members who were best friends, and they thought it was the sweetest and funniest thing that they could never go on a double date because while they were best friends, one of their boyfriends was a blood and the other one was a Crip.
Mm.
And I thought, this is horrifying. And this is just part of life for them. But one day, one of those individuals came into work and was really looking upset. And so I called her into the back and I said, what's going on? Because she was normally so cheery and just loved entertaining the customers. And I noticed that she's literally crying.
Mm.
And I said, what's going on? And she said, tells me that her boyfriend had been shot multiple times and left for dead, and she was taken to shock trauma via medevac helicopter, and they didn't know if he was going to live. And so my reaction was, what are you doing here? Like, leave, go home, go be with your friends, with your anywhere but here. And I knew that money was tight, so I said, I'll pay you for the day, I'll personally cover your shift. That, like, don't worry about the store or your job, go. And she said, no, no, I need to be here. I can only be here. This is my happy place. It was the most impactful moment of my professional life. And it set me on this course, which eventually got my graduate degrees in industrial organizational psychology and led to my consulting and speaking within the industry and trying to help everybody make work their happy place. If happy place means a place where there's a sense of meaning and belonging and where you can actually have this meaningful impact on the world around you.
Wow, that's an amazing story and a very common story, I would say, unfortunately in some parts of Baltimore, where things like that happen,
Yeah,
often in an urban setting. And you can find that in any urban setting, not just
yeah,
here in Baltimore.
right.
So you recently got your PhD and you focused this research that you did on employees, how employees fall out of love with their work. So what causes that loss of passion and can it be reversed?
Yeah, so that's a deep question. So always been driven by passion because I live big, I live passionately, and always, the catalyst, that story that I just shared, the catalyst toward my research and everything that I do professionally was the idea that these ice cream scoopers, these Cold Stone employees found meaning in scooping ice cream. And, my friends who were doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, people with objectively meaningful work, objectively meaningful jobs didn't want to go to work on Monday. They were disengaged. They were burned out. They were dispassionate. And so that's what led me to this research. And the question leads people, what creates this passion, and then what happens when it goes away. And what I found was that with my respondents, there was these individuals would enter the workplace and they would put everything into it. And passion is an interesting thing because it's defined in the psychological literature as feeling this love for your work, this meaning in your work, but even beyond that, where the work becomes part of your identity, right?
Mm,
So, like, when you ask an educator what they do, if they're any good, they're not going to say, I teach. They're going to say, I'm a teacher, because it's part of their identity. And so, what happens when those individuals start falling out of love for their work? There were a lot of different really interesting themes, but one of the most compelling for me was that it was almost split in half between my respondents. About half of them, about almost exactly half of them, reported what we normally think of when we think of burnout, where it was overwork. They allowed their organization to take advantage of them. And more often than not, they took advantage of their own love for work by volunteering for more and more and more and taking on more and more and more, trying to prove something to themselves and to other people. And that overwork would lead to this eventual decline in their passion. But fascinatingly, the other half of respondents, of my participants, responded that that it was the exact opposite, that it was stagnation that led
mm,
to their decline in passion. So it was this idea that they came in and they're driven by mission, yes, but also by personal development and growth, and we don't like to stagnate. So when they had reached where they could go, within their current job, if they didn't have a manager or a leader who was providing new opportunities and taking advantage of this, of not taking advantage of them, but taking advantage of the opportunity that this person wants to learn and wants to grow and wants to continue to be challenged, if they didn't continue to feed that, the person would also end up falling out of love with work. So,
it's interesting.
yes,
Yeah, that's
super complicated.
fascinating. I could see why you were so passionate about your research. I was interested to know also during your research, because you talk about identity, and I think it's important to understand, for people to understand that you have more than one identity. So you might be a teacher, but you may also be a daughter, a husband, and balancing those aspects of our lives can cause burnout at work, because I believe people, and it's been my experience with managing teams, is that they bring, like you talked about, the young lady whose boyfriend got shot, that they bring those things to work. And so managing those identities is particularly those who are in leadership and experience burnout. Part of it, I think, and you might just have discovered this because you did the research. I didn't. So, but managing those identities or having balance in their life also can contribute to, this is all I do and this is what I do well. And you're sort of stuck within that one identity. What
Yeah.
do you think about that?
Yeah, I love this idea because, you know, I would slightly tweak what I found. Like, I think slightly tweaks that or adds a different dimension to it. I think that, yes, oftentimes we balance multiple identities in our life, but sometimes, and the healthier way forward with passion, because let me rewind 1 second. So the passion research, passion has been alive and discussed in philosophy for thousands of years,
Mm,
potentially, right? But the idea of passion has been discussed as this great evil, that passion is like a vice that pulls us away from being productive and causes us to go to war and causes us a lot of harm. And then there's passion discussed as this virtue.
Mm-hmm.
So when recently, within the past 20 odd years, when passion finally entered the realm of psychology and psychologists started studying passion, this researcher who originated this conceptualization called the dualistic model of passion said, yes, both of those things are true. And maybe there's two different angles, two different pathways to passion. And so they're appropriately named harmonious passion and obsessive passion.
Hmm.
So obsessive passion becomes when I feel compelled. There's this internal compulsion or an external one where my performance at work is my sense of self, and if I fail at work, then I fail at life. And interestingly, that obsessive passion is not as integrated into the person's sense of self and their identity. It's part of their identity, but it's a fractured part. It doesn't fit perfectly. The harmonious passion is where it's harmonious and it just fits. So it's not like a different identity. It's a reflection of that identity. It's a different milieu, a different arena
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
kind of use your identity in a different way. So when people look at what I do and they say, wow, you do so many different things, because I teach grad students, I speak, I train, I do consulting, I parent, but I view all of those things as the exact same job, just a different stage. My job, the way I see it, is to learn as much as I can about the human experience and psychology, and then put it through my messed up ADD brain and spit it out in unique ways and teach. And so I'm doing that wherever I am. So when I'm at work in that ice cream shop, I was doing that in my leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever I go, it's a reflection of the same identity. It's just a different aspect of it, but not a fractured identity.
Mm.
Interestingly, we see that individuals that are primarily experiencing obsessive passion, it seems that that's the less healthy version of passion that can lead to overwork, and it can lead to, an early study of passion they did on cyclists. I think it was like in Canada or something. And they found that the people who were identified as obsessively passionate about cycling would cycle through the winter and injure themselves again and again. And the cyclists that were harmoniously passionate, they were cycler, right? It was part of their identity, just like the other group. They loved it just like the other group, but they would put their bicycle away in the winter, you know, because
Mm-hmm.
of balance. And so we say that one of like a litmus test for whether you are more obsessively passionate about your work or harmoniously passionate about your work is, at the end of the day, are you able to close your laptop and be with your loved ones without any shame or guilt?
Mm.
Or, I don't want to throw her under the bus, but I do frequently. My wife used to have this challenge where during bedtime, she'd have her phone out and she'd be rubbing our son's back, and on her phone at the same time, feeling so much guilt and shame because she has this project due for school, for her work, which is school. She's a teacher. She'd have all this guilt and shame and be pulled in two separate directions, kind of like two segmented identities at the same time, and
Mm.
feel horribly that she's not able to put everything into her work, while simultaneously feeling horribly that she's not able to put everything into bedtime with our child. She, I say, has earned a honorary PhD in my book, because she has gone through every step of this thing with me. And I think that the process of learning and of both of us learning so much about passion, like, she is a changed person now with her relationship with work. And people who are harmoniously passionate at work are actually more effective in the job. Obsessively passionate people put in more hours, but harmoniously passionate people are actually more successful, even though they close their laptop at the end of the day without any feelings of guilt.
Thank you so much for explaining that, because I think that's really important. And That's excellent. It's an excellent explanation for that. So people can sort of measure where they are with. So in this particular case, what are some of the small practical changes, those who are experiencing some sort of burnout or they don't want to get up and go to work in the morning? What can they do today or begin to do today to begin to reignite that passion and prevent burnout? Or if someone is leading a team, if someone in our audience is leading a team and they see that the team is experiencing burnout, what can they do? What are some practical things that they can start doing today?
Yeah, it's such a great question because I was hoping that my research would give me the answer to that. And I think that originally I'm seeing so many different paths and I'm thinking, this is horrible. This is horrible research. I don't have an answer. You know, Sifting through all of my findings and really thinking on it for more years than I wanted to. I eventually came to the conclusion that it is a beautiful answer. The beautiful answer is that, and HR people say this all the time, IO people say this all the time. It depends. But I think that there's beauty in that because it depends on you. There is no one right answer because for every person who is burning out and losing their passion for work because it's too much on their shoulders, there's somebody who's losing it because they are not given enough responsibility and enough to stretch. And so, what leaders can do is get to know their people. They need to understand where their people are. I always say, because I don't know about you, Dr. Lena, but every manager or leader I've ever talked to has assured me that they have an open door policy, right?
Mm,
I mean, they all say it. They all say it. And even for those that it's true, you can walk into their office at any time. Don't rely on your people coming in to your open office. I always tell leaders that the only open door policy that works is if that door is open wide enough for you to get your butt out of your own office and approach your people.
yes, indeed.
Know your people. Know your people. And so at the individual level, it's really about knowing yourself and having those conversations, letting your manager know what you need from work. But even more than that, question yourself, what drives me at work? Is it that my sense of value is tied into this work? Am I trying to please somebody? Or is it that I find this innately meaningful? Do I find like that this is really, and that can change over time. A lot of times you talk to athletes and they're athletes throughout middle school and high school, grade school, and they do it for the love of the game. But then something shifts and then they get into the NCAA and then maybe professional sports. And now their entire reputation, their entire career and future is tied to these things. And they go from being harmoniously passionate, where they're doing it for the love of the game, and now they're doing it because they feel that their whole sense of self is tied into this, that they feel compelled. And it becomes unhealthy and they start to not enjoy the sport the way they once did. So what can you do about that? One of my participants, learned a valuable lesson from their passion decline. They said that what they learned was that it can't be all about the current organization, the current employer, the current job title. They have to understand they have to take a step back and understand the value that they bring through their work, the value that they bring every single day, and understand that whether it's with this organization or with their hobby or with their family, that's what they contribute to the world. And don't get super invested in the bureaucracy and the politics and the interpersonal conflicts and stuff within a certain workplace. Be in love with the end result, with the impact that you're having on this world, on your end users. Maybe it's your employees, maybe it's your clients or customers, maybe it's society at large, but refocus on that and make it about that.
That's excellent. And I think it's so important. We would have so much to talk about, David, because I think it's so important because you do bring your personal values and the values, then there's the values of the organization itself. I just did a podcast on that. And I think it's really important to understand that because then you can get more of a wider view or that you're doing all this for a larger purpose. This is not just, you don't get stuck in the politics of work or the power struggles at work when you understand that. So, and it does have a big impact on your attitude towards your job. So that's an excellent explanation of it. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk just in your opinion. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but I'm thinking about it a lot. In your opinion, do you think AI will either advance or hinder healthy work culture? Or do you think that has any kind of an impact on it?
Oh, I think it's going to have an impact for sure.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But I was just saying to somebody last night that I feel hopeful. I'm definitely cynical looking forward and seeing AI is going to knock out a whole lot of jobs. I tell my students, who are training to be industrial organizational psychology practitioners, and so they're going to be internal consultants, external consultants. I keep telling them, become specialized in an industry that AI can't like delete so quickly or replace so quickly, like construction or whatever. Find those niche sort of industries where they're not going to be replaced for a while. But at the end of the day, I don't think that AI is going to replace all of us. I think that what's going to happen is if you lead like a robot, the robot's going to take your job. All these middle managers that are worried about AI taking their job. If you are a teacher and you teach like a robot, AI is going to take your job. If you are a doctor, even, and your bedside manner like a robot, the robot's going to take your job. So I think that the human element is going to become more and more critical, and authenticity is going to become more and more critical. I think people are going to be thirsty for that human experience, and the human experience is going to be the competitive advantage in the long run. I think right now we look for robots because honestly, the robots treat us better than a lot of professionals that we run into on a daily basis, and that's sad.
Yeah.
But if we remember what it is for that, to embrace that humanness, I think that it could improve the workplace. I think it could improve the efficiency and the creativity of the people who are left standing. And if those people that are left standing because they are the most human, the most empathetic, then I think it'll leave us with a lot of other challenges. What do we do with people who are losing their jobs? And I'm not saying that I'm looking forward to the near future with where AI goes, but I think that the individual workplaces could be, enhanced without removing that human element, but actually doubling down on it.
I agree with you. And also to your point, I was thinking as you were talking that I was running a team during COVID. And so can you imagine throwing COVID and a robot trying to
Yeah.
supervise? So much of life is contextual and the environment changes all the time. And so would robots be able to adapt to that change? And so I think it's really important. We don't really know what's going to happen with AI. I don't think anybody really knows. And so even the experts who have studied it, but I think you're right. I'm not real optimistic about a lot of people losing their jobs and so on. But as you said, that human element, as long as humans are going to continue to exist,
Right.
I don't think robots can ever replace that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you and I we talked about also we talked about DEI and how it carries such a stigma in today's society. And we had a great conversation about that. So I'd like you to sort of share with our audience what you think went wrong with the whole concept of DEI.
Yeah. Well, it's a loaded topic. You're going to get me in trouble with someone, but
To get you in trouble.
which is something that I think as a society, we have to be able to move past and be able to really look at things in objective ways and, without being worried that we're going to be, you know, shot down by this side or that side. My take on DEI. So I teach at University of Maryland, and I was teaching my talent development course when just as all these organizations started getting rid of their DEI policies and infrastructure and programs. And so I called an audible, midway through the course, and I took one of my classes, the individual classes, and I said, "All right, here's the readings for this week. Not this other stuff. Here's the readings." And I had them read this big packet on anti-racist training, which made a really strong, if not emotional, yes, but also just an all-around strong argument for not just DEI training, but anti-racist training. And then I had them also read this article about why DEI fails and why DEI should go away. And then as the third piece of reading, I had them read this article. It was right when Walmart made an announcement that they were scaling back their DEI initiative. So I had them read that straight from the news, what's happening right now. And that week we met in class after they had all done the readings, and I said, who was upset about the readings? And the two people who didn't raise their hand were clearly they didn't do the readings because you couldn't read these readings without being triggered one direction or the other, or
Hmm.
maybe by both. It's such an American quality or Western quality that we're unable to have two counter thoughts in our head at the same time. You know, that dialectic thinking is
Mm-hmm.
very present in the East, but not in the West. And so we don't do well in the gray. And you could just look at our politics and see we don't do well in the gray. We're either left or right or wrong, and that's where we live. So they did these readings, and we had a very frank discussion in class about it. I think what happened is that DEI training, DEI programs in general, I think that they need to be designed for impact. And I think that they became sort of this gut reaction by employers where everybody needed to do something. With the rise of Black Lives Matter, everybody felt this pressure to roll out these DEI initiatives. And so, in so many cases, they just found somebody who said that they could do it, or unfortunately, somebody who looked the part, quote unquote, right? Who like, oh, we'll put you in DEI. So now they have one person of color on their entire senior staff, and that person happens to be the DEI person, right? And so I think it was so performative. So much of my work surrounds burnout, and you're hard pressed to find a higher rate of burnout than in DEI professionals. Why? Because DEI professionals become DEI professionals because they want to see real change. And
Hmm.
again and again and again, in so many of these organizations, they were hired thinking they were going to have an impact, and they found that it was performative. And that was it. They were checking a box. They were showing their clients, customers, employees that they were with the cause, but that was the end of it. Nobody wanted to do the real work to really make work inclusive and equitable and diverse, right? And so I think that that was the one side of it. And so it was performative and too often. And on the other side, you had people who were like, why am I sitting through these trainings? And the trainings weren't effective too often because there was no science behind it, because they wouldn't put the right people in the right places often. They wouldn't put the right programs in place to actually implement change. And they didn't sell it for what it actually is about. I think that, I'm a bit of a work geek. Like I love the idea of work. And one of the most beautiful things about what we get to do when we go to work is that we get to come together in groups with diverse people with diverse perspectives and tackle these problems in ways that magnify anything that we could do on our own. So I think the diversity of thought and perspective and experience is the multiplier. I think it's so valuable. But I think that bad actors on every side of the fence made it more about politics and social pressure than they did actual impact. And so it became like this virtue signal to the right or the left, depending on where you fell on DEI. That being said, now that DEI has suddenly become a bad word overnight, I think that it's so important to get back to the basics and say, okay, you were calling this DEI, but what was the end result? The end result was you were trying to build organizations that were inclusive, where people felt that they had a voice, where they felt a sense of belonging. Who is against that? Who is
Mm-hmm.
against that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what we have to double down on. It's funny because I have this talk that I give at a lot of conferences and offices, and it's building a kinder kind of workplace. And every time after I give that talk, people come up to me and they say, like usually in like a whisper, that was a DEI talk. And I'm like, no, but you know what? My approach is if you're trying to like maximize the benefits of work and the impact that work has and make it work for everyone, then I think the basic concepts of DEI have to be built into everything that you do. It's part of it. It's not a separate segment necessarily. It's gotta be baked into it.
Yeah, I also think too that a lot of the DEI programs, from my experience, have been too cookie cutter. And I keep saying this too. It's sort of like talking about that life and every environment is all contextual. You have to understand where those people have been. And also, if you just go around the nation, forget about around the world and changes in cultures. You mentioned that it's different in one country than it might be in another country. You've done some work internationally, and if I've traveled internationally and done work internationally, and so we have to understand where people are. But in this country, a lot of times when things get labeled and defined, a lot of times people come with a preconceived notion about what it is. Automatically it's going to be rejected if it has been defined before you even get a chance to understand what it actually is.
Right.
And so I think at each organization, as you know, has a different culture. And so you have to start there rather than just bringing in your cookie cutter,
Yeah.
you know, approach to engaging people and getting them to understand what it is. So, yeah.
It's so interesting because at its core, so much of DEI work, effective DEI work, is exploring and explaining that we all come with cognitive biases of
Absolutely.
all kinds, and we've got to understand those. Once you understand them, then you can pull those unconscious biases into your conscious mind, and that works across the board. It's not just a DEI concept. It works across the board to make work more effective. And people more effective. And so it's interesting to me that so much of the work, when it was so clear that people have biases about this topic one way or the other, we would go in and say, all right, forget all that. We're doing this DEI training and using the same terms that have been politicized outside of work and not recognizing everybody is going to approach that with a bias. One direction or another, they're coming with a bias. And it's like, if you don't address the bias right out of the gate, if you don't address that people are coming with different perspectives, address that people have heard other things and been fed other things by bad actors, and also been, just they've got their own unique perspectives on it. If you don't answer that from the very start, then you're doing a disservice to the change that you're trying to implement.
Exactly. And that you're hitting on the exact point about when I was talking about when I said cookie cutter. A lot
Mhm.
of times if you start with critical race theory that's automatically going to be very offensive to a lot of people. Naturally, because of those unconscious biases, it will be, of course. Describing that way or blame is coming out and blaming people for history and those kinds of things. Of course, it's not going to go down well.
Right.
So that's part of the failure as well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to pivot a little bit because you and I also talked about, and I wanted to get your take on this. We talked about higher education and how it appears, and you're doing the work. You're in higher education. I also have a background in higher education. So it appears not to be as valuable as it once was, having a degree or whatever. I think that higher education is important for developing relationships and enhancing critical thinking skills. But many people think there's a lot of backlash now against higher education, and they think it's all about theory. And I hear this a lot. However, I believe, like any scientific discovery, theory always precedes innovation and practice. It should inform practice.
Yeah.
Theory should inform practice. So I believe we need both. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And it's okay, right? So what are your thoughts about higher education, and does it need a reformation?
Yeah. So I think you're trying to get me with all the triggers. No, so I think
I'm sorry, but I know we don't have all day, but
Yeah.
but
let me tell you
these
about
are
my employer. No, I'm kidding. So yes, my philosophy has always followed this statistician named E.P. Box has this great quote. As a statistician, he said, all models are wrong, some are useful. And I think that's the approach that works in education. I know when I graduated with my master's degree, I was ready to tackle the world and like conquer the world. And everything that I heard, I'm like, that's fake. That's fake. Let me tell you how to do it. Like I had all the answers in the world. One of the things that I really stress with my students is that you don't have all the answers. My students are studying industrial organizational psychology. And so they are spending so much time and energy and sometimes tears, really becoming experts on industrial organizational psychology. But you know what they're not an expert on when they go to work with a client? They're not an expert on that client's experience, on that organization, maybe on that industry, but your client is. And so it needs to be a partnership hand in hand. The ivory tower kind of thing to like go in and just say, here's how you need to do it. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you want the respect and the buy-in, which is so critical for change, you need to be working hand in hand, but it's not just to gain the buy-in, it's because they actually have valuable information. So when we teach theory and models and research, it's like that's the starting point. That's the toolkit. It's not the instruction manual, it's the toolkit, right? So now when you go into an organization, you learn everything you can about that organization in this moment in time within this industry. And then you start looking at your catalog, your toolkit, and you start to say, well, that kind of fits this theory and maybe we could pull this in. But at the end of the day, it needs to fit the needs of the organization. So I teach my organizational change class. It's like students are in their third term, I believe, a fourth term by the time they get to me out of 5 terms in this course, organizational change management. And I bring in a live client and I tell my students, I get pleasure from your pain in this class because here's what the pain is. They've spent so much time working on case studies and theory and learning the right answers. And as soon as you are facing off with a live client, the right answer is oftentimes the wrong answer because you have to consider utility. When you're working with a 2-dimensional case study, you can give the best, most deepest theory-based arguments and interventions, and they're absolutely brilliant. And you can write a 50-page paper on it absolutely brilliantly. But when you're facing a client if you give that to them, that's ending up on their bookshelf and never coming off. It's never being implemented. So it's a question of it's a question of utility. What can this individual, this organization, this team, this group, what can they actually handle? What does their bandwidth look like? Their budget, their personnel? Do they have the resources for this stuff? And to really understand that, oftentimes, so when they get to this organizational change class, if they have 50 different interventions and they're all genius and that's not a passing like that. You're not going to pass with that. If they have one intervention that seems so simple and it's like, but that's so small, but they go deep and they make it turnkey. And so that the client knows exactly what to do with it. And this is going to have this impact. And then you have future considerations. Like after this, I recommend that you explore this, and this. Now you're talking about something that can actually have an impact and create change for the client.
Yeah. When I was thinking about, and my work in higher ed was with dental students or in the medical field. I've spent a lot of time, I was also executive director of a foundation in a hospital setting. So when you talk about patients showing up and they're presenting with certain symptoms, theory is important in the sense that, okay, but it's also it informs practice. So, if a patient is showing up with certain kinds of symptoms, then this is how you treat this. But it's not cookie cutter in the sense that, of course, because not every patient that is experiencing these symptoms, you got to dig deeper. You have to adapt
Right.
what you know about how to treat this particular disease or whatever. You have to adapt based on the person. So it is a customized way of approaching, but you do need the foundation of understanding disease in order to treat. So it's the same way, I think, also in the social sciences. So it's important. That's why I say higher education is important, because you really need both.
Yeah.
Because a doctor that has seen this over and over and over and over again still can't assume every time they see it that they need to respond in the same way.
Right.
So,
that expertise is so important. And the fact that, my students, they sit through almost 2 years of their life just thinking about these things. When do you get a chance to pause and think and discuss and experiment and fail and pick yourself back up? All about just like thinking about the theory and thinking about the research and thinking about how do we apply these things. I think that it creates so much value. And it's so sad that too has become so politicized, where you're either with it or against it. But even learning theory alone, like if we'll pull in a theory after I just said don't over rely on theory, but in learning theory alone, there's a theory called the 70-20 model. And what that argues is that formal training, so like standing up and lecturing in a classroom or in, a training session, a half day training in your organization, that makes up 10% of actual learning that happens with professionals. Only 10%. 20% is social. So we're talking mentorship and coaching. And the bulk, 70%, is experiential. It's on the job. It's actually getting to try the things and fail at them and things like that. And so I think that it is a absolute mistake to not value all three of these things. But if you look at the model itself, the 10%, that's sort of the baseline. That's where it starts. And that's where you get the foundation, like in the classroom with the theory, with the models. But eventually you've got to get to the part where you are trying and failing and picking yourself up again. My wife teaches first grade, and she has this thing in her class where anytime somebody makes a mistake, if she makes a mistake, if a student makes a mistake, if a guest makes a mistake in their classroom, the person yells out, "Oops, I made a mistake." They don't fumble and try to pretend like, well, what I meant to say or what I'm actually saying, or just repeat the right word afterwards. They stop and they say, "Oops, I made a mistake." And then the rest of the classroom yells out, "It's okay." And it's not, "It's okay. Like, better luck next time." It's actually, yeah, we're celebrating this. It's not just okay, it's great. And I think if her first graders can get that. As they are now, I'm not going to age my wife, but as they're approaching professional life now, I can't wait to see these individuals in the working environment because we're missing that. We're missing that as adults. How many of us actually do celebrate mistakes? I think it is
Hmm.
incredibly important. And that's that experiential part. Like scrape your knee and get back up. Make it a safe space to do that. Um, but yeah, but starting with the frameworks and the models and the research and so that you're standing on the shoulders of giants when you now are facing these challenges yourself and now face them and celebrate your successes and celebrate your mistakes.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. So, my final question for you is, just in case any of our HR friends are listening
Yeah.
or watching, I mentioned to you that I find my experience over 25 years of experience in the workplace and leadership positions. I find that HR professionals tend to be more policy driven than human centered kind or leadership centered kinds of issues. It's more about this is our policy and this is how, this is our policy. I hear a lot of that in the workplace from HR professionals. So, how can HR professionals become or help to enhance the workplace culture and make it more human centered
Yeah.
rather than policy centered?
Right. I think just like a lot of us, they get lost in that stuff. That's part of that passion decline is where you get bringing it full circle, but where you get lost in the paperwork. You're mission driven. You come in because you want to make a difference, but then there's piles and piles of paperwork for you. And so you get lost in the daily grind and you don't have the ability to think about these broader pictures and the impact that you can have and that broader impact. And I don't think that most people desire that. I feel like when I speak at SHRM chapters, oftentimes there's one table of people who seem to really own the policy. That's like the policy table. And they usually sit like off to the side and look at me with very judgy faces because I'm not a policy person. So I feel like rules are meant to be broken. But they, there's usually that one table. I think that a majority of others are either already doing some of the larger sort of mission driven work or finding that, helping with the culture and change management things, or they want to do that more and they don't get to do that more. But so I think that it really depends on the individual, what they're able to do within the framework of their job. But I would say that HR professionals, just like everyone else in the workplace, need to understand that the culture within an organization, every single one of us is a victim of our culture, yes, but we are also all co creators of that very same culture. Everybody plays a role in creating the culture. And so sometimes it has to start with you. We know that leadership and influence and power, often we look to the org chart to see who has the power, but we know that I think that every one of your listeners could probably think of somebody that they've worked with in the past who had a title but no power behind it, and that they can all also identify somebody who had no title but really held the power within the organization. And if that's true, if you're able to reflect and think about that individual, then why can't that individual be you? So I think that we can all take on this role of being the one who starts it and starts to spread, this positive sort of culture, supportive culture, growth minded culture. Everything in the workplace is contagious. Everything from incivility to burnout to passion decline, it's all contagious, but also all of the good stuff, compassion, engagement, those things are contagious too. And so I think if you want to see that happen, let it start with you. Now, if you have the ability to work with policies and a strategy and things like that, then yeah, now you've got more of that formal power too, that you could start pulling some really important levers. But at the end of the day, let it start with you.
Excellent. So I said that was my last question, but I have one more question.
It's-
As you were speaking, you did mention that I don't know, we didn't talk about this, that you were Jewish, or I don't know if you're a practicing Jew, but my question is to you, because this is the servant leader's mindset, but it also has its grounding, the podcast has its grounding in faith. So my question to you would be, how does your faith inform what you do? Because my faith informs everything that I do. I'm Christian. So how do you integrate your faith into what you do every day when you are teaching, consulting, etc.?
yeah, I think that falls right in line with the idea of harmonious passion. You can't leave your faith at home. You can't leave your value system at home when you go to work. You know, we've talked about all the things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company today, but but like the DEI and the anti-education, but remaining with that theme, talking about your religion within the workplace is usually not something that happens, but being able to lead with your values, I think is
Absolutely.
incredibly valuable. And I think that those values come through. And people see that. And I think that there is so much benefit to that when people see that. One thing that's I think would be really interesting for your listeners, specifically through that lens, is with burnout. One of the communities where we see the lowest recurrence of burnout is within religious communities.
Interesting.
Religious people, on average, burn out far less frequently than other people.
Mm,
Why? Because they bring something unique with them, but also work is not the end all be all. They leave
absolutely.
work and they've got something. They have a social network outside. They have values outside of work. They have service outside of work. They have, whatever type of prayer that individual exhibits, where it's the self talk and reflection outside of work. And so all of those things are so protective when people are experiencing where other people would experience burnout, because work is the end all be all, or this segment of them and not their whole person. I think it's really important to bring your whole self to work and not leave those values at church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday. I think that's really important.
That's an excellent answer. Thank you so much. Well, you have given our audience a lot to digest. So now, if people want to know more about you and what you do in your company's services, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so they could find me on my website, davidshar.com. They could also find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect and continue the conversation. And LinkedIn, you could just search for my name or do that /IN/my name, David Shar, SHAR.
Excellent. David, it's been a real pleasure. And thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the show. It
Thank
was
you.
pleasure to have you.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine, really.